Hi, my name is Dale, and I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel, Observer of Anomalous Objects. And if you haven't done it already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I greatly appreciate it. This is a new channel. It's growing. I've got 20 videos. This will make 21. And I'm so excited that you're here. Today, we're going to talk about the fact that UFOs are here. Now, there's been a lot of discussion, and a lot of scientists argue this, that they can't get here, or the better yet, how could they get here? And let me make this clear. It's not a how question anymore, because they're here. You know, it's a who and why question. I mean, that's the questions we should be asking now. Who are they and why are they here? And in fact, in my last video, I gave some possible scenarios of why they're here. But this video is going to be about the fact that they are here. UFOs are here, and I'm going to give you a bunch of information to help you see that this phenomenon is real. We're looking at something that is not made up. This is not a hoax. This is not all misidentification. Some of it is. When people see things, they don't always know what they're seeing. But the stuff we're talking about today is undeniable. And let me say it again. UFOs are here. Okay, UFOs are here. And so I want to start by talking about the different programs our government has started to study UFOs. And if we have to go back to the beginning, or at least as far back as I can find, and I'm assuming this is the beginning, but it dates back to 1947. You know, this is when the government started getting involved in UFOs. And of course, 1947, that's a pretty important date for those of us who study ufology, and that is the Roswell event. And that's where a flying saucer crashed. The Army's first report was the correct one, where they said it was a flying disc. Of course, the next day they had to recant that and say, oh, no, this was a weather balloon. And then years later, when they realized people weren't buying that, they came out with another solution, which wasn't a weather balloon. It was a special balloon that tested for radiation, because they were wanting to test and see, you know, if the Soviet Union was doing nuclear tests and stuff like that. And then later on, they decided that wasn't enough, because people were talking about alien bodies, and they said, oh, no, those were crash dummies. Now, the problem with the crash dummy story is the fact that that took place, I think, in 50 or 51. And Roswell was 1947. And so that part never made sense. It never made sense to begin with, because the stories keep changing. And so we can go back to the original story and know pretty confidently that that was the correct story. But in 1947 was Roswell. Not too long after that, Project Sign was started, and that was the government looking into UFOs. And at first, I mean, everybody was in. I mean, if you went to America in 1960, UFOs were big. People believed in them. But what happened was there were so many UFOs being reported that many of those in the Pentagon and other places started thinking, you know what? We've got our eyes on UFOs, but we're taking our eyes off of the Soviet Union, which they believed was the greater threat. And so they started to basically deny and ridicule. That's exactly what they did to try to stop this. And so then you get the next project, which is called Project Grudge. Project Grudge. That's an accurate name for kind of where the mentality of studying UFOs went. And then from Project Grudge, we got Project Blue Book. And I want to make this clear. Project Blue Book was a sham. It was an absolute sham. I mean, that was just to make it look like they were looking at UFOs. But what a lot of America didn't know, maybe people even today, is that there were literally two different programs going on at the same time. One is Project Blue Book, and then they had this other secret program, and that's where all of the really good data and information, especially from the military, was going there and not to Project Blue Book. And so that's why I say it was a sham. The conclusion was predetermined, and eventually They shut down Project Blue Book in 1969. And the chief scientist on that, J. Allen Hynek, started off as a skeptic about UFOs, but having been a part of Blue Book and talking to the different individuals and the evidence that was presented, he became a believer that UFOs are here. And he started lecturing about it and going around the country. He became a believer because he saw the evidence on that. And so from 1969 up to almost 2017, the government's official position was that we do not investigate UFOs. But 2017 changed that and showed that that just wasn't true at all. Because in 2017, the New York Times came out with an article revealing a secret U.S. government UFO program by the name of ATIP. Now, ATIP wasn't technically the first program. The first program would have been ASAP, which was basically Harry Reid got $22 million to study UFOs. And you got to remember, Harry Reid was from Nevada. At the time, they didn't call it Area 51, the Groom Lake, but everybody knew about the testing thing, and he knew that things were going on out there back then. So anyway, they put out bids. Robert Bigelow won the bid, and his company, or his department, he used the National NIDS, National Discovery Science, Institute of Discovery Science, went out to the famous Skinwalker Ranch and spent 10 years out there studying the phenomena that was taking place out there, because there were UFOs and then there were other things associated with UFOs. But here's the part that just doesn't make sense. They spent 10 years studying it and never released any of their findings. It all became classified. And let me tell you something, they found something. It's not that they spent 10 years out there, twiddling their thumbs. They found something. And the worst part is we paid for it. We paid for this study. The American people paid for this study. And yet they get to keep it. And I'm sure that Bigelow probably was able to use some of it in his companies as well. And I think there's other companies that are benefiting from it. But anyway, that was ASAP. And then ATIP came out of that. The director of ATIP was Lou Elizondo, a very honorable man. I'll talk more about him in a minute. And he was in charge of ATIP from, I think, about 2012 to 2017. That's when he left ATIP. He resigned his position because he could not get the information to those who needed to hear it. And so I finally realized I cannot fix the problem from the inside. I'm going to have to go on the outside. And that's exactly what Lou did. And that was part of the story that broke. And then from 2021 to the present, we've had 3 more different UFO programs taking place. The first one's AIMSOG. It's not quite pronounced that way, but it's closest that I think anybody can pronounce it. There's an O in there as well. Then you have the UAP task force that followed that. And now we have ARROW, which is the 8th and last of the different programs that have been taking place. Now, getting back to what brought us to where we are today, to the 2017 New York Times article, is there was an event that happened off the West Coast with the Nimitz carrier strike force. And one of the ships that was there was the USS Princeton, which had the Aegis radar, the most advanced system we had back in 2004. And they started seeing these different radars images and several of them. In fact, Kevin Day once said it looked like they were raining UFOs. These images were out there. And finally, after I think 12 days, somewhere in there, he goes to the captain, Kevin Day does, and says, you know what? If something happens, they're going to ask us why we're so incurious about this. And so he convinced the captain that they needed to go on and investigate it. And so they sent 2 of their F-18 Super Hornets out there to investigate it. And one of the pilots was Commander David Fravor, and I believe the other one was Alex Dietrichs. And so they went out there and they go out to where this radar image was being seen from the Princeton. And all of a sudden, Captain Fravor looks down and he sees what he believes is what looks like anyway, a 40-foot tic tac. For those of you that aren't into tic tac, he said something about you can call it a propane tank, a big old huge 40-foot propane tank, and it was down at the water level. And the crazy thing is that the water was being turned underneath it, like there was something there, like this tic tac was down there, having something to do with whatever this other object under the water was as well. And he said, Commander Fravor said, when he spotted the tic tac, that it's like it noticed him about the same time. And so Alex stayed up here while he went down to cover him from above. And as Commander Fravor started coming down, the tic tac started coming up. And about the time they got close, all of a sudden, this tic tac just shoots away faster than anything that Commander Fravor have ever seen. And he made it clear that it was not ours. It was not our enemies, our adversaries. It's unknown. It's an unidentified flying object. And that's not even the craziest part. The craziest part is all of a sudden, they're telling Commander Fravor that tic tac has just shown up at the cap point, which is like the rendezvous place for the jets, and only they would know it. So how in the world did this tic tac, without any wings, without any way of lift or no visible propulsion, how in the world did it know where the cap point was? And so another thing he said, that when this event was going on, and this came out in the latest hearing, was that it had jammed his active radar. It had jammed his active radar. And I'm not an expert on radar, and I don't claim to be, but I did read a little bit so I could hopefully make sense out of this. Active radar is basically microwave waves that allow a jet to target an object. And so, and then there's passive radar, which is basically radio frequencies. And what happened was this UAP was targeting, blocking or jamming his active radar. And so all he had was passive radar, and that's the only way he could see it. And that makes sense if you think about it. If you saw that jet as a threat, you would jam its active radar so it can't fire upon you. And so that's all pretty cool stuff. And my analogy of the difference between active radar and passive radar, and this is my way of understanding it, and it may not be accurate, but this is the way it makes sense to me, is that active radar is like you can talk to somebody and they talk back. Basically, you hear them and you can talk back to them. You can reach out and touch them. You can target them. Where when it comes to passive radar, it's like a radio frequency where you can hear them, but you can't target them. You can't talk to them, in other words. And so that's my way of understanding that as well. Now I want to talk about some key individuals, military personnel who've come forward, who've made it clear that UFOs are here. Remember what UFO stands for. It's unidentified flying objects, or the new term UAP, unidentified anomalous objects and stuff, or phenomenon. Take that back. And so we have to understand that it means unknown. And so we know that UFOs are here. We know that UAPs are here. But anyway, this man is a hero right here. I mean, if they ever do another Mount Rushmore, because of what he's gone through and what he gave up to be able to come outside and, of the department he was leading, because it was leading nowhere as far as the information, and doing everything he has done. Let me tell you something. Lou Elizondo is a hero. I don't care what any of these people say, and you know who I'm talking about. Lou Elizondo was the real deal. Everywhere I've been able to check, he is exactly who he said he was. In fact, Harry Reid came out and said he led ATIP. And so this is an honorable man. This is a man that should be respected by everyone, but he's one of the ones that have come out. He was a director of ATIP from 2012 to about 2017 when he resigned. The next significant person who's come forward and advocating for us going out and studying these objects that are in our skies is Chris Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. He comes from a very popular or famous family line, the Mellons, well known, well respected, but he was like the second most powerful person, I think, just under the Secretary of Defense. And he's come out and said UFOs are real. They're here. They're here. This is like a high ranking person. And then the next one we've talked a little bit about, the Black Aces commander, the Top Gun pilot. He came forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the third hearing that took place. But a man with absolute credibility. Not one person has ever questioned his credibility, questioned that he is who he is. And so there was a reason why he was in that third hearing. And then here we have probably the most important whistleblower that's come out so far. I'll say this though, is that Lou Elizondo was the first to come out and push this. I mean, Lou Elizondo was David Grush before there was a David Grush. But David Grush came out with some pretty profound information. Now, given this, none of it's firsthand. We have to acknowledge that. But when you have 40 different people that you've basically given the names to the ICIG, the Intelligence Community and Inspector General, who do have firsthand knowledge, who have talked to the Intel Community Inspector General and have spoken, who, by the way, the ICIG said that this was credible and urgent. David Grush's complaint. And we've seen also how the military and how the what we want to call gatekeepers and those that don't want disclosure and want to keep our secrets secret, how they've attacked him for his autism and for his PTSD. And it's just an absolute disgrace. You know, they haven't come at him dead on and try to discredit him because they can't. Because David Grush is an intel officer. He is exactly who he said he was. He worked exactly where he said he worked. But he's another person that's come forward to say, not only are they here, but we have some of them. We have crash retrieval. We have reverse engineering programs. And not only that, but we have pilots, as he called them. We have biological remains. He said, if you have, crashes and you're going to have pilots. And he called it biological remains, which was, pretty phenomenal. And I'm telling you what, you want to talk about getting people excited, because it's all kind of been a myth. Bob Lazar was one of the first ones that I've ever heard of talk about crash retrieval, and he got hammered. And there's all kinds of people who don't believe him, but I'm telling you what, the more I see, the more I believe Bob Lazar. And so just a really credible person. Now, I'll be honest with you. One of the things that really got me going into this subject, I've always loved Star Wars. I've always believed we're not alone in the universe. But really, the part that got me excited and probably got me more involved was the videos that were leaked, from the government. And this is not an actual video. This is our artist's rendition of the Tic Tac. But we also, not only we have the Tic Tac, which I've described already, we have the gimbal. And that one was actually rotating, and it was stationary in 125 knot winds. It's right there in the recording, which I don't have, but it's stationary. It's not a balloon. And so some of the debunkers have tried to come out and say that it was the afterburner of a motor, but the winds and all that stuff was not calculated. In fact, NASA, I think NASA's the one who's already come out and said that it's not an afterburner. And the individual, who I'm talking about, is still trying to say, well, I still think it was this. Well, science and true scientists have said, you're wrong. You're 100% wrong. And then, of course, I think one of my favorite is the go fast, especially when you hear the video of when they actually lock onto it and finally capture it. It's that little dot down there, but that thing's just streaking along. But these were the the ones that really, I think, got people excited because we've seen the videos, we've seen the grainy videos, but these were military videos. These were authentic military videos that were leaked, and eventually the Navy was forced to come out and say, yeah, these are legitimate. And they finally came out and admitted that as well. And so we have all that going on. Now, the other thing that we have on our side to prove that UAPs are here, or UFOs are here, is we have the science community starting to wake up to the reality of UFOs and UAPs. And I have to give a lot of credit to Avi Loeb, who you see on your screen there. He was one of the first scientists in recent years to really step forward and say, you know what, there are UFOs are here. In fact, he was the first one to talk about the Muamua, which was an object that did not originate in our solar system. He put the hypothesis out there that this could possibly be ET. And so it's moved away. So there's no way of knowing for sure. But there were certain characteristics that made him think that it wasn't a meteor, that the way it was moving and stuff that it did, that it wasn't a meteor. But anyway, the other thing I like about Avi Loeb is he's actually started what's known as the Galileo Project. And that's to get as many scientists and other important people in research looking into and studying UFOs from a civilian perspective, separate from the military. And I think that's important. I mean, if we're going to get to the truth, I think we have to have a multi-pronged attack going on. And so we've got the military, we've got Galileo Project, we've got social media. We're hitting it from 3 different angles. And now there's starting to be some more advocacy to try to really get the Congress and them more involved in making this an issue when it comes time to vote. And I really believe that as well. Not only do we have that going on, we have another scientist. Let me get to him real quick. And that is Gary Nolan. He's a professor over at Stanford. Whereas Avi Loeb was an astrophysicist at Harvard. Gary is an immunologist at Stanford University, basically studies biology. And he's got a lot of prestige. In fact, he's got patents. He's got a couple of companies that he's sold that were on the NASDAQ. Just a really smart guy. And in fact, he was so well known that when the U.S. military started having what we call biological effects on some of their military soldiers, and also contractors, they sent the cases to Gary to go ahead and study. And so he studied these about 100 individuals who had biological effects from being near UAPs. And he came up with the conclusion that their symptoms were very similar to what we call the Havana syndrome. And some of you remember that we had our embassy in Havana. All of a sudden, these strange things started happening to our diplomats. And so somebody was doing something to them, causing them to be dizzy and sick and headaches and all this. But what he discovered from these people, these military people, these contractors, is that the side effects that they were having were very similar to the Havana syndrome. And so we've got the scientific community. More and more scientists are starting to come around to the idea that UFOs are here. And then we have NASA involved. In fact, the person you see up there is Senator Bill Nelson, former senator anyway. Now he's the administrator of NASA, and they've started an independent study group of high-profile scientists and others to go ahead and study it. And let me just add this as well. That doesn't even take into account the 2023 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, where they wrote in a provision about UAPs, whistleblowers, and they were looking for a material retrieval and a reverse engineering. That was actually written by Congress into this NDAA. In fact, there's another one that's gone out there, and I think Mike Turner's one of the ones, Representative Turner's fighting against this getting passed. By the way, he's the representative from Ohio. And so Wright Patterson Field's there. That's where Project Blue Book was. And so we just kind of, many of us feel like he's bought and paid for by the military industrial complex. And I'm just going to say it. I mean, if you live in Ohio, you need to vote this guy out of office, because he is no friend to disclosure. He's an avid critic. He thinks we're wasting our time. And I think he's wasting his time in office, and his time in office should be done. And this is not political. I don't care what party you're part of. If you don't want disclosure, and if you're going to fight against transparency, and you're going to fight against the truth, you need to go. You need to go, because the American people deserve better. They deserve a lot better. Now, the other thing that I haven't mentioned yet, which has to be mentioned to talk about the fact that UFOs are real, is we've got to look at the hearings that have taken place. You realize that in the last 2 years, we've had 3 hearings. We've had 2 in the House and 1 in the Senate. The first one was in the House, and it had a lot of key individuals that were involved with it, too many to name. But the 2 individuals that were brought up were Moultrie and Bray. And, they basically just told us that they were going to look into it, but they really didn't give us anything. And then the second hearing was in the Senate, and that's where Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of Arrow, got up and spoke. And he did something that Bill Nelson did recently in the latest NASA one, is saying, well, we have no evidence they're extraterrestrial. Well, at least on Kirkpatrick's side, people have come to him and told him and told him where the evidence was, but he stuck his head in the sand, and he's saying there is no evidence, which, by the way, Bill Nelson said that, but Bill Nelson followed it by saying, well, we don't know. Well, if you don't know, if you don't know, obviously you don't know if it's extraterrestrial. And so why even bring that up? It's almost like there's an agenda to steer people away from extraterrestrials. I mean, because it makes no sense. If you don't know what it is, then obviously you wouldn't know whether it's ET or not. But there's a lot of people believe that they actually do know, and they do have the evidence. They just, once again, that maybe NASA is doing like Project Blue Book did, that they're only going to look at the non-classified information. And so where's the good stuff going to be? Ask yourself that for a minute. Where's the real good stuff going to be? Is it going to be in the unclassified stuff or the classified stuff? Of course, it's going to be in the classified. So some of us are a little worried about NASA. I was pretty upset after the last hearing, but I'm going to hold my judgment on him. I'm going to give him a chance to do the right thing. But I did not like it when he said there was no evidence for extraterrestrial. And then he said, but we just don't know. And once again, I don't understand why they did that. But anyway, that was the second hearing I was talking about. And now we've moved on to the third hearing, which is the one I think that just lit up UAP Twitter or UAPX, because, I mean, they really did a good job in that one. They actually brought in witnesses, not the government people running the programs, but people with knowledge. Is like, for one of them was Commander Fravor, David Fravor. He got up and testified about what he saw. And he clearly said, it's not ours. This is not Black Ops projects. This is not how it works. They have private areas to test the Black Ops. They're not going to take it out in the middle of war games and test. That's not how it works. And then the other one was Lieutenant Fravor, who was part of the Roosevelt Air Force task force that saw the gimbal and the go fast and stuff. And he got out there and talked about what he knew about and stuff. And so it was really good. 2 credible people. That's why they started off the third hearing that way, before they dropped the bombshell on everybody by having David Grush speak third. And that's where he started. Earlier I mentioned he started talking about legacy programs, crash retrieval, reverse engineering. He went in further than that, further than I think anybody would have expected. And he started talking about alien bodies and stuff. And so the third hearing is the one that got us most excited. But I want to say this to everyone. I know there's a lot of people that are disappointed because Mike Turner, Representative Turner, basically shut down any more hearings in the House intelligence community. But I want to say this, man, we're making a difference. And we have to understand that every time we have success, those who don't want to give up the secrets, they're going to attack. They're going to come after us. They're going to try to stop us. They're going to get people in high places to try to stop this. But as long as we keep fighting, there's no way they can. And you can't get this back in the can anymore. I mean, this is out. And so what we have to do is not lose heart, not get discouraged, but we got to keep fighting on, because if we do that, I guarantee you one thing, we're going to win. They cannot stop us. Now, we've talked about the military, we've talked about science, we've talked about Congress and what they've done, but there's even more to it than that. We have ex-presidents talking about UAPs. We have actual stars out there, whether it be basketball or football, saying, you know what? I've seen a UFO. In fact, I want to play a video clip right now where President Obama talks about UAPs. And then right behind that, we're going to hear from Shaquille O'Neal, and he's going to talk about his UFO experience. So let me go ahead and play that for you right now.
There's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are.
And now that UFOs are being taken more seriously, more people are coming forward with their own sightings. Shaquille O'Neal told Jimmy Kimmel he's certain he's seen a UFO.
With all the lights, and it was spinning, and it just and took off, and everything happened in less than 5 seconds, and we all looked at each other, was like, and I know that it was a UFO. I don't care what anybody says.
You never told anybody about that?
Nope, you're the first person I told, because I don't want people to think I'm crazy. But
Right.
Did you notice why get this straightened out? Did you notice that he said I was the first person he told about it, Shaquille O'Neal? Why? Because he didn't want people to think he was crazy. Well, let me tell you something. The tide is turning. Public opinion is coming around. Famous people now feel safe enough to be able to talk about their UFO experiences. In fact, I was blown away recently when I was watching NFL Total Access, and this was probably a couple weeks ago, I guess it was. But all of a sudden they talked about UFOs, and I thought, this is weird. Why is a NFL TV program talking about UFOs? But that tells you how mainstream UFOs or UAPs have become. And it turned out that the backstory of this was during Hard Knocks, which is an HBO program that goes to a different team every year and goes to their training camp and kind of monitors it and records it and then presents an episode every week. Went to the New York Jets, who, by the way, have a new quarterback. Sadly, he tore his Achilles in the first game, but his name is Aaron Rodgers. And so they interviewed Aaron Rodgers during Hard Knocks, and he said this.
Last night I'm in bed, I'm watching Hard Knocks, and at one point I'm asking myself, did this thing just become X-Files?
Woke up, and I was getting down to bed. I heard this alarm in the distance going off. And Steve and his brother and I walked outside, and up in the clouds, you know, we heard this sound, and we saw this tremendously large object moving through the sky. And it was like a scene out of Independence Day when the ships are coming into the atmosphere and they're creating this like kind of explosion type fire in the sky. And about 30 seconds later, we heard the real recognizable sound of fighter jets going shoo, shoo, shoo. But yeah, Steve and I, great friends, teammates, and also witnessed whatever the hell it was. I don't know, but it was definitely unidentified. It was definitely flying. It was definitely a large object.
So there's Star Wars is happening outside.
It is. I like the Independence Day references.
No, that's good.
Okay, so this became like a major topic of conversation. The text threads were going, in the meeting, post-meeting, the whole thing. You guys are kind of all in on this.
Oh, I'm a believer.
Are you a believer? See, I
100%.
wasn't for a while, okay, Kimmy? Because my dad grew up in Santa Cruz in the 70s. So we heard all these stories. Like, he had so many different encounters and his friends, and we would always just write it off. It's like, Dad, Yeah, okay, it's kind of like darkness retreat stuff, like 70 Santa Cruz, right? But then the government starts releasing stuff. Aaron Rodgers, and now it's all over the place. I'm a believer. Like, I'm a believer. We literally had to go and have a party and an apology for my dad, right? We had a cake, right? Everyone got together.
No,
Said, you know what, Dad? And Roger,
Not the
I'm
music.
sorry. We believe.
Did you hear? Did you hear that? All three of those NFL commentators said they believe in UFOs. They believe they're here. I mean, we're making a difference. Now, the cool thing about that story by Aaron Rodgers is this wasn't the first time he had told it. I went and did some research, and I found back in 2020, he had basically told the same story with a few more details in this version as well, exactly about the orange object, where it was going from left to right, that it was in New Jersey. And so let me go ahead and play that clip for you real quick, too.
Anyway, long before this happened, 15 years ago, and I told the story on the Nerdist podcast with Pete Holmes, comedian friend of mine. But I told a story about how I was in New Jersey with a teammate of mine, Steve Levy. And Steve has been asked to, after I shared this on the podcast 5 years ago or so, he's been asked to verify my story, and thankfully he did.
Steve.
But it was him and his brother at their house in Jersey, and we saw a crazy thing in the sky that filled up most of the vantage point that we had. It was a snowy night. It was orange and moving in the clouds from left to right. And the bizarre part that was attached to it was that after it went out of sight and we were frozen looking at each other wondering what the hell just happened, about 30 seconds after that, we heard fighter jets.
So I want to go ahead and just close this episode out by just reminding you again, if you enjoyed this, and I hope you did, that you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But there's no question. I mean, I just gave you a ton of different individuals, and we've got the government, we've got Congress, we've got science, we've got an ex-president, we've got popular sports figures. We've got all kinds of people saying, you know what, this is real. UFOs are here. And so it means we're not crazy. This is a real phenomenon. This is really taking place. This is reality. Amen. This is reality. And so once again, thank you for watching this episode. And I'll try to get another one out in about 2 weeks. That's kind of my MO. You have a great day. And once again, thank you for watching.